He was attention deficit hyperactive disorder, as well as autistic. He had speech and motor impairments.
Norton Shores is the kind of place that slips easily into the background of a map. It's quiet, picturesque and unassuming. Tucked along the western edge of Michigan in Muskegon County, this lakeside community sits cradled between the tranquil waters of Mona Lake and the vast, endless stretch of Lake Michigan. Its roots reach back to 1845, when it was first carved from Ottawa County and named Norton Township. 2 years later, Robinson's Mill rose near Mona Lake, and in the decades that followed, the dense forest gave way to fruit farms. By the 1850s, berries and apples were the backbone of the local economy, carted by hand to waiting boats that connected the inland lake to the open waters of Lake Michigan. By the late 1960s, change loomed. Facing the threat of annexation, the township made a decision. In 1968, it formally incorporated as the City of Norton Shores. Since then, the city has settled into its identity, part suburb, part rural haven, a place where people go to live quietly, raise families and grow old in peace. Just a short drive from the local airport lies Marshall Road, a neatly kept neighbourhood of single-family homes. The kind of street where kids ride bikes on the pavement and neighbours greet one another by name. The lawns are clipped and the mailboxes are upright. From the outside, everything appears ordinary. But in 2022, something happened on Marshall Road that would shatter that illusion. A 911 call came in from a woman who reported that her teenage son was unresponsive. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident. But that wasn't the truth. Behind those walls, something sinister had been happening for some time. Norton Shores was home to a 15-year-old boy named Timothy Ferguson. Timothy's parents, Shanda Vander Ark and Eric Ferguson, had separated when he was still a little boy. The couple had 4 children together, Nolan, Paul, Millie and Timothy, and after the breakup, their lives took different paths. Shanda eventually moved to Michigan with Timothy, while Eric headed south to Florida. In Norton Shores, Timothy didn't just live with his mother. His older brother, Paul, who was 20 at the time, also lived in the home. Shanda had a younger son as well, just 7 years old. The family had once lived in Oklahoma, but by now they were trying to rebuild in a new place, in a new chapter. After the divorce, Shanda had remarried a man named Adam. She studied law at Western Michigan University's Cooley Law School and passed the bar exam on her very first try. It was a remarkable accomplishment, and it led her to work as a law clerk for 2 different circuit court judges. Her job involved conducting legal research and preparing case memoranda, intellectual work that demanded focus and precision. She worked full-time, 40 hours a week, earning just over $19 per hour. But tragedy struck again when Adam, her husband, suffered a debilitating stroke. The family dynamic shifted drastically. With Adam unable to work, Shanda became the sole provider, juggling a demanding legal career with the needs of her household. At home, her adult son Paul took on a caretaker role, particularly when it came to Timothy, who needed more support than most. Timothy had been diagnosed with multiple developmental and mental health conditions. He was on the autism spectrum, had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and also lived with bipolar disorder. Each of these things on their own could be difficult to manage, but together they formed a complex web that made everyday life more challenging. Autism spectrum disorder often meant that Timothy experienced the world differently. His sensory input could be overwhelming at times, and social interaction didn't come easy. He had speech and motor delays that made communication and movement more difficult. ADHD then added another layer, with bursts of energy and difficulty focusing or sitting still. Bipolar disorder introduced emotional volatility, sharp highs and painful lows that could come without warning. But none of that defined Timothy. He was a sweet and imaginative boy, one who found comfort and joy in small, focused activities. He loved building with Legos, following the instructions meticulously piece by piece, creating models with the kind of patience and determination that often escaped him elsewhere. Sometimes he didn't even need a guide. He would build whole new worlds from his imagination, placing one coloured brick on top of the other, like he was creating order in a world that so often felt chaotic. His older sister lovingly called him Tim Tim. She remembered how his smile could light up a room, how despite everything, he still remained kind. There was a gentle spirit in Timothy, a softness that made him easy to love, his siblings said. He was vulnerable, yes, but not broken, and he certainly wasn't a burden. But inside that home on Marshall Road, behind closed doors and beneath the surface of suburban normalcy, something was unravelling. It was just after 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 6th of July 2022 when a 911 call came in. On the other end of the line was Shanda Vander Ark. Her voice was strained and flat. She told the dispatcher that she had just woken up to find her son, 15-year-old Timothy, unresponsive in his bedroom. Emergency responders were dispatched to the family's home on the 4700 block of Marshall Road. As officers stepped through the front door, they were immediately struck by the stench. The air was thick and suffocating. The family's home was in a state of complete disarray. Filthy diapers littered the floors, plates crusted with old food sat on top of the counters, and wrappers were piled in the corner. Even more disturbing, feces had been smeared on the door handles and mashed deep into the carpet. Lieutenant Joel Hoeksma later said, "It wasn't just dirty. Some people live clean, some people live dirty. This was just gross." The responders made their way into the basement, where Shanda was found kneeling beside Timothy, her hands moving through the motions of CPR. But it was clear that it was too late. His body was limp, cold, and his limbs were beginning to stiffen with rigor mortis. Shanda stepped aside as the paramedics took over, but the heart monitor told them what they already knew. There was no activity. 15-year-old Timothy was gone. As the team worked, they couldn't help but take in the environment around them. In one section of the basement was a small windowless room, bare but for a plastic tarp on the floor that smelled of urine. A webcam had been positioned nearby, its lens aimed directly at the tarp. Then there were handcuffs, and then there was Timothy himself. He was emaciated. His clothes hung off him like empty seals. His bones pressed sharply through his skin. His face was gaunt and hollow. Officer Ryan Peasky recollected.
That he was extremely malnourished, at least it appeared that way. Very skinny. You could see bones protruding from his body. You could see his ribs through his skin.
Bruises marred Timothy's chest, and he was wearing a heavily soiled adult diaper. There was no mistaking what they were seeing. Detective Stephanie Alm would later say, "It was very hard to believe a child of his age would look like something out of a concentration camp." Timothy's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, where the full extent of his suffering was laid bare. He weighed just 69 pounds. The cause of death was malnourishment and hypothermia. The pathologist recalled.
So it was readily apparent upon viewing the body of Timothy Ferguson that he had a very low body weight. He appeared extremely emaciated. He was 68 inches tall, inches long, inches tall, and he weighed 69 pounds at that point. It was clear he had really a loss of all of his body fat. His cheeks were very narrow. You could see and count all of his ribs, and even internally when we're looking at him, he had in areas where you typically have some body fat within your abdomen and in different areas, there was none. There was only the little bit of connective tissue that would normally hold the fat. But you could see all of his bony prominences, and on his back he had started getting some pressure sores because there wasn't a lot of padding in between his bones and his skin as well. So where those areas had pressure, the skin was starting to break down.
This was not an accident. This was systematic, prolonged torture. And this was only the beginning. Back at the home on Marshall Road, detectives began to piece together a far more disturbing portrait of what life had looked like behind those walls. Room by room, evidence painted a picture of control and cruelty. In the bathroom, investigators found bottles of hot sauce. Strange on its own, but more disturbing when they paired that with the shackles that lay nearby. There were locks on both the refrigerator and the freezer, restricting even the most basic human need, food. Cameras were mounted throughout the home, along with motion sensors. They were watching, recording, tracking every movement. One camera was aimed directly into the small closet in the basement. On the door to that closet was an alarm. There was also a bathroom in the basement. Officer Sean Stefanik recalled.
And then did it track your motion then? Or
It followed me as I walked through the bathroom.
What did you observe about the bathroom itself?
Bathroom was very dirty. There was dirty adult diapers on the floor, and there was no shower curtain.
By now, Shanda was sitting outside on the steps in a state of panic.
He's been wearing really loose clothes the last couple of weeks.
He's really skinny.
He's really skinny, and I didn't notice till this morning because he wouldn't, I asked him if he's okay, and he would not answer me. He's 15, he's been...
He has autism?
Yeah.
Like a high functioning?
Yeah. I had no clue how bad it was. Oh my God. Like I said, he did this back in, my husband's stroke was January 3rd. Mm-hmm. So he did this back in, second week of January for almost 3 weeks. And then he ate something last night. I can't remember what it was now, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
She told the first responders about Timothy's issues, his diagnoses, his behaviour. She said that lately he'd stopped taking his ADHD medication. According to her, he had gone on a hunger strike for nearly 3 weeks. She said she had threatened to take him to the hospital if he didn't eat. That seemed to get through to him, she said, and for a brief time he started eating again. But she said that in the past 2 weeks, Timothy had stopped once more. Even when she offered protein shakes, he refused. The night before his death, she told detectives, she warned Timothy again, eat, or I'll take you to the hospital. Timothy agreed, she said, and she made him 2 slices of toast with butter. She claimed he ate about 3/4 of one slice, but then refused the rest. That, according to Shanda, was the last real interaction they had. At around 5:30 a.m, she said she heard a noise. Timothy had fallen out of bed. Down in the basement, next to that urine-soaked closet, sat a metal bunk bed.
Now you said the last time you saw him was 5:30 this morning?
Yeah.
Did he say anything?
He had fallen out of bed.
At 5:30?
Yeah.
You sure it wasn't earlier?
I mean, it's possible. I thought it was 5:30, but I wasn't super awake. I heard a thunk, and I came down, and he's kind of laying on his side, kind of like, what the heck? And I reached out, and I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah. And I reached out and he pulled himself up, and I asked him if he's okay, and I just asked if he hit his head. He said, no, I think I hit my knees on my chest, I think. He couldn't tell me how he fell. Oh my God.
Shanda said an hour later she checked again. This time, Timothy wasn't breathing.
Well, we have to investigate every death. So I can't let anybody go in the basement for now.
Okay.
A medical examiner's going to be coming here in a little bit.
I'm sorry it's a little cluttered down there, but
You're fine.
I'm sure y'all have seen a lot worse.
Okay. You're probably going to get asked the same questions multiple times, so I'm sorry for
Oh,
that.
it's fine. I just, like I said, I feel like I just missed something.
So if you want
How
to...
did he hide that from me? How did he do that? Oh.
It was a thin story, and detectives weren't buying it. And they had every reason not to. By the time Timothy Ferguson died, his name was already known to Child Protective Services, just not in Michigan. It was in Oklahoma years earlier that warning signs first began to surface. The family had been investigated on 9 separate occasions. People at church had noticed that Timothy and his 3 siblings often wore the same filthy clothing. Some were still in soiled diapers, well past the age they should have been. Something felt wrong. And in February of 2008, authorities opened their first case. At the time, Timothy was just 18 months old. The allegations were serious. Medical neglect, inadequate nutrition. One caseworker observed that Timothy was underweight and appeared unhealthy. The family was referred to early intervention programs aimed at helping parents of children with developmental delays or disabilities. But the case was eventually closed. No children were removed and the family stayed together. But the reports didn't stop there. One complaint detailed how Shanda and Eric had refused to allow social workers into their home. Another raised concerns about potential sexual abuse taking place in the household. That triggered a deeper investigation. On the 25th of October 2009, police and social workers arrived at the home. What they found horrified them. There was feces, animal and human, smeared into the carpets. Trash was strewn throughout the rooms. The air stank of decay. But without a court order, they couldn't legally remove the children that day. They came back the next day with the proper paperwork. This time the house looked different. The floors had been scrubbed, the garbage was gone, but the stench still lingered. Despite the sudden transformation, authorities weren't fooled. The children were removed and placed into foster care. Timothy and his siblings spent the next 2 years apart, living in separate homes. Meanwhile, their parents were given an opportunity to work on their problems. Eric took that chance seriously. He completed parenting classes, he went through counselling, he cooperated. Shanda didn't. She skipped her classes. She told the social worker she had worked through everything she was willing to. When it came time for the judge to decide custody, the choice was clear. Eric was granted full custody of all 4 children. Shanda was given supervised visitation 3 hours a month. In January of 2012, Oklahoma's Department of Human Services recommended that her parental rights be terminated. But instead of going through with it, Shanda agreed to give Eric full custody voluntarily. On paper, her rights remained intact. In practice, she was gone. By then, Shanda had already started over. She'd moved to Michigan, she'd remarried Adam, she'd had a new baby. She had a new life, but she left something behind. 4 children who no longer recognised her as their mother. Her daughter, Millie, would later reflect on that severed bond and stated, "I haven't referred to her as my mother since I was 14 or 15 years old. She hasn't really been a big part of my life, and I prefer to call somebody lovingly by the name of mother when they've earned that title." To Millie and her siblings, Shanda wasn't a mother. She was just a name. She said, "She barely had any part of our lives. I don't think she was a mother for the children. I think she was a mother to call herself a mother." That should have been the end of it, but in 2020, one of Shanda's children made a decision. Paul, who was now an adult, chose to move back in with his mother. Timothy, meanwhile, was living with his father, Eric, and Eric's new wife, Patricia. It wasn't a perfect situation. Timothy had special needs. Patricia tried, but she wasn't trained to care for a child with complex developmental disabilities. It wasn't easy. So she asked Eric to be more present, to help shoulder the responsibility. Instead, Eric made a decision that would ultimately cost Timothy his life. In 2021, he sent his son to live with Shanda and Paul in Michigan. Almost as soon as Timothy arrived in Michigan, things began to change. Not in the way he may have hoped, not with fresh starts or warm welcomes, but with isolation. Shanda never enrolled Timothy in school. When asked, she said that he was being homeschooled, but there was no curriculum and there was no education. Timothy was being erased from the outside world, one connection at a time. He became a source of conflict between Shanda and her husband Adam. But that tension was interrupted when tragedy struck. Adam suffered a stroke. He could no longer care for himself, let alone the boys. So he moved out, returning to his parents' home to recover. That left Shanda alone in the home, responsible for 3 children, all while working full-time as a law clerk. The pressure inside that home began to boil over. But the anger, the stress, the cruelty, it didn't fall equally on everyone. Timothy became the target. He was punished for existing, for needing too much, for being different. And the abuse wasn't just coming from Shanda. Timothy's older brother, Paul, became her enforcer. While Shanda was at work, Paul was left to watch Timothy. What followed was nothing short of torture. Thousands of text messages between Shanda and Paul would later reveal the daily horrors that Timothy endured. They treated him like a prisoner in his own home. He was systematically starved. One day, Timothy was caught trying to steal a slice of cheese from the refrigerator. His punishment was to sit in a bathtub filled with ice water. On another day, he was seen eating the crust from a leftover burger. Shanda made him vomit it up. Water was even forbidden. And if he was given food, it was cruelly twisted into punishment. He was only allowed to eat bread that had been soaked in hot sauce. Sometimes they'd force his mouth open and pour the hot sauce down his throat. Shanda and Paul restrained him with zip ties and shackles. He wasn't even allowed to sleep in a bed. He wasn't even allowed to sleep in a real room. Instead, Timothy was forced to sleep on a urine-soaked tarp inside a dark, windowless closet in the basement. That's where he spent his nights and most of his days. He was hidden from visitors, even his grandparents. When he wasn't locked in the closet, he was forced to clean the house without pants on. Paul was the muscle. Shanda was the mind behind the madness. She texted Paul from work, instructing him on how to hurt her son. "I'm ready to kill Timothy," Paul wrote in one message. In another, Shanda wrote, "Please make sure you go downstairs regularly to make sure Timothy isn't asleep before you leave for work." In another, she wrote, "Maybe we should leave the light on. That way it'll be harder for him to fall asleep." Then she added, "I honestly don't care if you get a little rough with him." Paul responded like a willing accomplice. In one message he wrote, "I ended up dragging him back to a small room because I wasn't going to risk him having access to the tub or other things overnight. He's still trying to be stupid, but I'll tell you more tomorrow when I take you to work, describing how many different ways I can prove he is faking." They convinced themselves, or at least tried to, that Timothy was faking his disabilities. That the autism, the ADHD, and the bipolar disorder weren't real. That he was just being bad. But Timothy wasn't bad. He was vulnerable, and he was being tortured. Millie, Timothy's older sister, wasn't there to protect him. but she had always thought that Paul was hard on his brother. She later said, Paul loved having a power trip over Timothy. He loved having any sort of control over Timothy, as domineering as it could possibly get. And now, Paul had all the control he wanted. When the truth finally came out, when detectives uncovered the twisted text messages that documented Timothy's torture, justice began to stir. By this point, Paul hadn't been arrested. He turned to social media.
Hey everybody, just figured I'd send a quick check for y'all, but we're doing good right now. I just dozed off on the couch unintentionally, and I forgot to give a quick check for today, but yeah. Oh, when I can't actually get in contact with you guys, I'll probably post a quick check like this. For those of you who aren't aware, my little brother has passed away, and my mother is currently in the custody of, well, I'm not sure if it's a lot to deal with, but right now we're doing good. We're fine, but if I can't actually Facebook you guys with live because I don't have my phone and I don't know how to access my stepfather's, I'll post a quick check to let you guys know everything that's going on. If you have any questions or anything, just comment them down below and I'll see if I can answer them in the next quick check. Just keep supporting and pray that the two of us get through this.
Both Shanda van der Ark and her son, Paul Ferguson, were arrested. Inside the home, there had been another child, Timothy's 7-year-old brother. Although he was physically unharmed, he had been forced to witness everything. He told investigators that just days before Timothy was found dead, Paul had dangled a frozen pizza roll in front of him, taunting him, mocking him, as Shanda watched on. She wanted to see if Timothy was still mentally coherent. If he tried to eat the pizza roll, Paul was told to rip it away. And that wasn't all. According to the child, the day before Timothy died, Paul gave him an ice bath. He said that his brother had been left in the freezing water for at least 9 hours. As the charges against Shanda and Paul were filed, custody arrangements were made for the 7-year-old boy. He was sent to live with his father, Adam, the man who had suffered a debilitating stroke. Adam had already filed for divorce from Shanda, and he was actively seeking custody. But tragedy would strike the family once more. While the case was still unfolding, Adam passed away from leukemia. Timothy's younger brother was then placed into the care of his paternal grandparents. As the legal system prepared for what would be a long and painful process, Timothy was laid to rest. His body was cremated, his ashes placed inside a custom-made urn adorned with a train, a tribute to his love for Thomas the Tank Engine. He was buried beside his grandmother. A small piece of comfort, far too late. On the 8th of July 2022, Shanda van der Ark was arraigned on charges of open murder and first-degree child abuse. She sat in the courtroom rocking back and forth in her chair crying. But for many who heard the details of what she had done, those tears were meaningless. The judge denied her bond. After the hearing, Muskegon County Prosecutor Matt Roberts addressed the press and said, "The investigation subsequently revealed that Shanda van der Ark had a number of punishments that frankly were just beyond the pale in terms of what should be administered to a child. Most notably the denial of food to the child, feeding the child nothing but bread, and bread soaked in hot sauce, and hot sauce poured down the child's throat, and placing the child in an ice bath." Just a week after Shanda van der Ark was charged, her son Paul was also charged with first-degree child abuse. When detectives brought him in for questioning, Paul's composure crumbled. He held his head in his hands and buried his face into the desk as he admitted to what they had done. He spoke about them withholding food.
When was the last time he was really talking to you, able to have a conversation, or at least try to have a conversation?
Last time he actually talked was 3 days ago, but the day before, or the day after that, the day before yesterday, he talked a small amount in the morning, but then he just sort of was making groans and moans, and it concerned me. As my mother was driving me to work, I recommended that maybe we should take him to the hospital.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that ever happened or not.
What did she say about that when you made that recommendation?
I don't know. I think after that, I think that was as I was getting out of the car and shutting the door.
He said that in the days before Timothy died, he couldn't even stand. He confessed that he had placed Timothy into the ice bath on the day of his death. He also admitted to hitting him repeatedly in the head with an open hand. He then told detectives that when he was removing Timothy from the bath, he dropped him on his head. Later that night, Shanda had shoved her son into the dark closet, lined with a urine-soaked tarp. Timothy curled into a fetal position. Shanda threatened him, "Don't move." But Timothy never moved again. By morning, he was gone. Paul said when his mother found him dead, she didn't panic. She didn't cry. She didn't even call 911 immediately. Instead, she told Paul to get him dressed. At that point, Timothy was wearing nothing but a heavily soiled diaper. And then she told Paul to lie. She made up a story that Timothy had been on a hunger strike. It was a narrative that both of them repeated until they couldn't any longer. There was no mistaking what had happened.
When was that?
That's your brother.
Yeah.
That's June 13th, less than a month ago. You sent this picture to her and you said, "He's looking like a skeleton, we need to give him more food." But you guys didn't give him more food over the next couple weeks. You guys gave him less and more punishment and less bread and more bread with hot sauce. That's what really happened. You reached out to her and said, "This is scary looking, right?" You probably thought, "He can barely walk." You sent a picture of his legs, right? You sent this picture of his legs to your mother, right here. You sent this to her. And what'd you say? Something along the lines of, "No wonder he can barely stand up or walk. Look at that." And your mother, being smart and intelligent and the smartest woman in the room, she didn't do anything about that, didn't think about taking him to the doctor, didn't think about, we have to give him some more food, seriously now. Instead, what do you think she did? She gave him less and more punishment. Until what? He ends up dead. And what did she tell the police? He was always wearing baggy clothes, so I didn't notice anything until last night. Another just blatant lie.
As both Shanda and Paul were ordered to stand trial, questions around their mental capacity were raised. Shanda's defence team requested a competency evaluation. She was found competent, and the report read in part, "In my opinion, Shanda Vanda Ark was aware of the charges against her, how they came about, and provided a consistent version of how events unfolded from her perspective." Paul was also evaluated. Concerns had been raised about his intellectual capacity, but doctors found no sign of intellectual disability or mental illness. He was functioning within the normal range of intellectual ability. Both were deemed fit to face justice. Meanwhile, the community tried to make sense of what had happened in their quiet neighbourhood. One neighbour, Timothy Minerick, said, "It's very disturbing. You see in the news all the bad things and you wonder when it's going to come to your neighbourhood, or your street even, and you just never knew." Most of the people on Marshall Road didn't even know that Timothy had been living there. That's how isolated he was. Another neighbour, Neil Huskra, said, "We didn't even know he was living there. All of us had no idea he was there." But what the most bitter reality of all was that Shanda should never have had custody of Timothy in the first place. His father, Eric, had full custody legally, but he had grown overwhelmed. Timothy's needs were many, and Eric had considered calling Child Protective Services. Instead, he sent his son to live with Shanda and Paul. Within less than a year, Timothy was dead. Shanda Vanda Ark was the first to stand trial, and it began on the 13th of December 2023. She walked into court wearing a blue blazer and a dark green turtleneck. Her hair was styled in French braids. In opening statements, prosecutor Matt Roberts warned the jury the evidence they were going to hear was horrifying. He said,
"As we referenced many times yesterday, unfortunately, as part of this process, you will see some very graphic photographs. Images that will not easily leave your mind. But I don't want you to focus on just those photographs, as I repeatedly told you yesterday. I want you to look at the entire picture here. I will tell you this, the entire picture is just as horrific. The average 15-year-old male weighs 132 pounds and is 68 inches tall. At the time of his death, Timothy Ferguson was right on that average height, 68 inches tall. At the time of his death, Timothy Ferguson weighed 69 pounds.
Then he asked a chilling question. How does a 15-year-old child in Michigan in July die of hypothermia? For at least 9 months, he said, Timothy had endured cruel, calculated punishments inflicted by his own mother and brother. He described Paul Ferguson, Shanda's son, as the strong arm of the defendant, the one who did what she didn't want to do herself. He was on death's door due to malnutrition, Roberts said. Surprisingly, the defence didn't dispute much of what was said. Defence attorney Frederick Johnson admitted their actions were extreme, but insisted they were never meant to kill.
And what you're going to hear over and over again, over and over, as you listen to these messages, is my client, Shanda Vanda Ark, and her oldest son, Paul Ferguson, had no idea that they were hurting this boy. If you listen to those messages, they don't have a clue. And it's two of them. It's not just the one, not her and just, At one point, he sends her the picture. At another point, she asks him, is he okay? Do you think we should feed him? And each time, the other person deflects and they continue to go on. They don't figure out that they're hurting Tim until he's dead.
But the text messages between Shanda and Paul painted a different picture. And then Paul himself took to the stand, testifying against his own mother. He said that food was restricted from Timothy within a month of him moving in.
He was sneaking food that was not necessary at that time, and it was solved by placing locks on the fridge, freezer, and pantry.
When you say he was sneaking food that wasn't necessary, who would make that determination that it wasn't necessary?
Shanda.
And what type of food are we talking about that he would sneak that wasn't necessary?
Sweets or anything he could really get his hands on.
So as early as February, there was restriction. The locks were going on the freezer and the refrigerator, and you said there was also some type of lock on the pantry. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Paul then spoke about Timothy's problems.
He was attention deficit hyperactive disorder, as well as autistic. He had speech and motor impairments.
Speech and what type of impairments?
Motor impairments, movement impairments.
Movement impairments?
Yes.
And at the time that he came to live with you, was he supposed to be taking some medication?
Yes.
And did he stop taking his medication?
Yes.
Why did he stop taking his medication?
Could you please reiterate?
Yeah, I guess the better way of saying it is, who made the decision for him to stop taking his medication?
Shanda.
Paul said that the only time Timothy was allowed to leave the house was to walk the dogs in the backyard. He couldn't be seen by any of the neighbours there. He testified that Shanda had made him chase Timothy up and down the stairs as punishment. He said Shanda ordered nearly all of the punishments. He just carried them out. There was only one order he said that he refused. It was a message from Shanda that read, "I wonder how it would feel to have that hot sauce on your private parts. I'm not saying touch him there, not at all, but dripping a little bit there. Is that horrible?" Paul said, that was beyond cruel as everything else was. He read aloud a message his mother sent shortly before Timothy died.
Crazy idea. Ask Gabriel if he wants some pizza rolls and heat up a set of pizza rolls and take one and offer it to Timothy and see what he does. Put it right in front of his mouth, but be ready to yank it back if he tries to eat it.
Now that's her text to you, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you actually do that?
Yes, sir.
Paul likened his reluctance to save Timothy as Stockholm Syndrome. He said, "I desire to find a role model. Due to my low self-esteem, I would do anything to make them proud of me." He suggested he might have autism, but admitted he was never diagnosed. Paul then told the court he never would have hurt Timothy if not for Shanda's instructions. And on the day that Timothy died, she had told him to put him in a bath of ice.
Okay. Is there, as you sit there right now, do you love Timothy?
I suppose I didn't love him enough.
No,
it's why I'm trying to bring justice for him.
Just a moment. I don't know.
But can I say that I loved him during the time before his death?
Yes. Did you love him before his death?
With all the ways I acted, I cannot.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Let me ask you this. When did you start feeling this way? While he was alive or after you found out that the way he was being treated killed him?
After.
So while the time he was alive, did you think you were killing him?
No.
Then Shanda took the stand. But when Prosecutor Roberts began questioning her about the hundreds of incriminating text messages, she suddenly didn't seem to remember much. She constantly replied, "I don't recall," or "I don't know," again and again. She then spoke about how she got custody of Timothy.
My ex reached out to me, stating that Timothy he could no longer handle him, that he was pushing his buttons, and that he needed to send him to live with me.
Okay. And you agreed to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Had you ever lived with Timothy during his...
When he was younger, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So you agreed to accept him into your home?
Yes, sir.
She said she had ordered specialty hot sauces online.
And what was the point of the hot sauce?
Because we had tried multiple other discipline methods, and he thought maybe that would get him to stop misbehaving. Okay. He suggested it to me, and I was so wrung out, I was willing to try just about anything.
All right. Were you aware of were you aware that this hot sauce was purchased online?
Yes.
Do you know why it was purchased online instead of going to Meijer and picking up a bottle of hot sauce?
Well, I didn't have time to go to the store. I mean, our groceries I did the grocery delivery through the Walmart app or through the Meijer app. And I didn't see anything, they just had basic stuff, and from our discussion, we had talked about something. And Timothy could handle this child. When I got pregnant...
I know you're going. Well, hold on a second.
Okay, sorry.
I want to make sure we understand this. This hot sauce has a particular label. I've never seen it at Meijer. Did you see the label? Did you see the hot sauce itself? Did you order it?
I believe I ordered at least one of the bottles, yes.
Okay.
She told the jury she hadn't tried the sauces herself, explaining, "I have a very weak stomach. I don't want to throw up." Shanda then spoke about why it took her so long to call 911.
According to Paul's testimony, why did it take you so long? He said 18 minutes out. Why did it take you so long to call the police?
I have no idea, honestly. I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. It was surreal. Like you don't even know what's going on. Time slowed down, and I didn't know what was going on.
When was the first time you found out it took 18 minutes to call the police?
Was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, it was within the last few days.
Okay.
That's the first time.
Do you remember who was testifying when you found out? It doesn't matter.
I think we discussed it at a meeting on Monday. Was it Monday?
Okay.
I think
It
so.
doesn't matter.
And I heard 14 minutes initially, and then the first time I heard 18 minutes was when Paul said it yesterday.
She claimed that the fridge, freezer, and pantry were locked because Timothy had tried to eat frozen food and raw meat. Then the prosecutor showed photographs of Timothy, taken just hours before he died. His body was skeletal. His ribs were visible beneath his sunken skin. Did he look like that when you put him in the bathtub? He asked. Shanda then began retching and vomited in the courtroom. But Timothy's sister Millie wasn't convinced. She later said she didn't vomit the time she saw him before, but as soon as the cameras pointed at her, she'll do anything to make herself look like a decent person. The trial lasted just 3 days. In closing arguments, defense attorney Johnson pleaded for understanding.
And it is my argument. The argument we've made from the very beginning is that while part of her knew she was punishing this boy, none of her knew that she was hurting him. I understand. There's two possibilities. One, she's exactly what Mr. Roberts said, and that's evil. That's evil. Or the other possibility is there's something going on and she doesn't understand. She didn't understand, despite all the intelligence, she didn't understand the ultimate consequence of those individual acts of punishment. The accumulated force and power and weight of those individual acts of punishment. She didn't understand it. She didn't see it. I don't know how that could be. But to be honest with you, that's what makes sense. It makes sense because this is her son.
But the prosecutor pushed back hard. Shanda wasn't some uninformed parent. She was a law clerk. She had passed the bar. She worked for a judge.
Nobody with the logic and reasoning skills that she has could not understand the consequences of what she was doing. I didn't intend for any of this to happen. We don't even know if that's true. It's not. But we couldn't even say that that was true anyway. She can barely even say that because by her account, she doesn't remember doing any of these things. For all we know, she did intend for all of these things to happen. Which of course she did. And remember we talked about the cookbook in voir dire. Went over it a couple of times. Unless you hear a defense from the judge in these instructions that says, if you find that the defendant just doesn't remember these things, that she can be found not guilty, she doesn't get the benefit of that. Don't add to the cookbook. Don't give her a defense that I just don't remember doing these things. I hope, on some level, maybe she doesn't remember these things because they are so cold. They are so lowly. They are so dangerous that they took Timothy's life.
Strangely, Shanda was absent for the closing arguments. Her defense attorney claimed that she was feeling unwell. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. They then returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty of first-degree felony murder and guilty of first-degree child abuse. Shanda van der Ark was immediately transferred to the Huron Valley Women's Correctional Facility. Sentencing would come later, but her conviction carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before Shanda van der Ark faced her sentencing, her son, Paul Ferguson, appeared in court and entered a guilty plea to first-degree child abuse. He sat silently as his attorney recounted the horrific acts he and his mother had inflicted on Timothy. When asked if it was true, Paul answered simply, yes. Then, on the 23rd of January 2024, Shanda returned to court to be sentenced for the murder of her son. The courtroom was filled with Timothy's siblings, there to share victim impact statements and confront the woman who had taken their little brother's life. His older brother Nolan addressed the court and said, "If I can't have my brother back, she shouldn't have her freedom back." He described the lasting guilt, the unbearable grief of not knowing what was happening behind closed doors.
I've had to leave my career behind. My wife has to watch helplessly as I struggle, day in and day out, wondering how none of us knew what was going on, wondering if I told Tim I loved him enough times for him to remember up until the very end. I have to wake up every day and pretend that I am who I was before Timothy died. I have to pretend to be Nolan so that my friends and coworkers and family won't worry about me more than they already do. I'm surrounded by people who love me and care about me, but not a single person besides my sisters who understand how hard it is. Timothy wasn't surrounded by people who loved him when he died. And if I had known that, nothing could have stopped me from rescuing him and holding him in my arms and telling him I love him, that his big brother's got him, just like I did the day he was born.
Then Timothy's sister Millie stepped forward. Her voice shook as she spoke about regret.
I like to say I don't regret things in my life, that every mistake I've made has made me who I am today, but when Timothy died, I couldn't stop regretting. I regret not hugging him more and teasing him so much instead of telling him that I loved him every once in a while. I regret not putting aside my differences with Shonda and Paul just to check in on him. I regret not dancing with him the last time I saw him at our brother's wedding. These are the things that I can't remedy now. There's no fixing what's been done. No way to redo it all over again, and that's my regret.
Millie said she wanted the world to know something important. Timothy was wanted, if not by her, then by me. He was loved by me. She said Shonda should never again be free to hurt another person. Throughout it all, Shonda refused to look at her children. Prosecutor Matt Roberts noted this lack of acknowledgement. All of the things that she did are so callous, so cold, they defy explanation. She had stopped thinking of her children as human beings. Timothy's father, Eric, wasn't in court. Shonda's attorney, Fred Johnson, gave one last defence. He described her as a single mother, overwhelmed, trying to balance work and school. He stated, "This is a survivor. We're not looking at evil, we're looking at sick." Then Shonda was given the opportunity to speak. Judge Matthew Castle addressed her directly. "I've been trying now for this entire case to wrap my mind around how somebody could do something so horrific, not only to another human being, but to their own child." He was blunt as he said, "You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. Let's call it what it is. It's torture." He said he didn't believe Shonda set out to kill Timothy, but that she had set out to hurt him over and over again. He said, "This wasn't negligence. This wasn't ignorance. You knew exactly what you were doing." Then the judge said something that struck everyone in the courtroom. He explained why he had chosen not to show the photos of Timothy's dead body during the hearing. He didn't want Timothy to be remembered that way. Instead, he showed the court a photograph of Timothy smiling. He said, "I'm choosing not to remember your son dead, looking like a Holocaust victim. I'm choosing to remember him like this, a beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was, and you took that from him." Shonda Vander Ark was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After her sentencing, the state moved to terminate her parental rights for her remaining child. She opposed the motion. She said she wanted to work on her mental health in prison and hoped to someday be a positive presence in her son's life. The judge didn't agree. He terminated her rights. Shonda Vander Ark would never again be allowed to contact her surviving son, not until he was legally an adult. He is now in the care of his paternal grandparents. After his mother was sentenced to life in prison, Paul Ferguson was the next to learn his fate. He returned to court on the 26th of February 2024 to face sentencing for his role in the abuse and death of his little brother Timothy. This time, there were no victim impact statements read aloud in court. The room was quieter, emptier. But Paul's older brother, Nolan, had submitted a written statement to the judge. One final plea on behalf of a family torn apart. He wrote, "I will not sugarcoat it and say that I am not deeply unhappy with Paul for not finding the courage to say something to anyone about what was happening in that home, but I have to take one last stand for him. Nolan told the court that their mother, Shanda, had manipulated Paul, preying on his inability to stand up for himself and turning him into a tool to carry out her twisted punishments. He described Paul as somebody who always struggled since childhood, someone who'd always felt like an outsider, someone their parents never bothered to truly help. He wrote, "I understand that the law sees him as a 20-year-old young man culpable in my baby brother's abuse, but as his closest relative, I urge you to see that this is not the case." He asked the court to consider alternatives to prison. He said there were people in the world who still cared about Paul, who wanted to help him rebuild a life. And when Paul was given the opportunity to speak, he broke down in tears and said, "I asked the judge for nothing more than mercy and fairness, to offer me compassion so I might learn from him. What reasons can justify my actions? I can make up 1,000 and never believe one. What words can voice my regrets? I can think of millions and yet never feel it's enough. If I could do it all again and do it right, I would. I feel I will pay for my choices and yet never feel better because he's still gone." But Judge Matthew Castle wasn't moved. He said he didn't believe that Paul was truly sorry for what he had done. He said, "The court believes Mr. Ferguson is one step away from becoming a psychopath like his mother. In fact, the court believes he is just as bad, if not worse, than his mother." He then sentenced Paul Ferguson to 30 to 100 years in prison. It went far beyond what the sentencing guidelines had suggested. Those had called for 9 to 15 years. As the court handed down the sentence, Paul began to retch in court. But it was final. The boy who had once been his little brother, Timothy, was gone. And now, so too was Paul's future. Well, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon: Misty, Jennifer, Lauren, Amy, Brittany, Dawn, and Carla. You can join us up on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and you're free to cancel your subscription at any point. I upload ad-free and early release episodes of Morbidology, as well as bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus that aren't on the regular podcast platforms. The most recent bonus episode is on the crazy story of Wendy and Randall Bjork. So feel free to join us up on there if you're so inclined. Morbidology is also up on YouTube, and the episodes there are presented in a documentary style with photographs and videos of each case. So if you could head on over there and hit that subscribe button, I would be eternally grateful. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.